Welcome to the Mound Science and Energy Museum Association seminar for October the 25th, 2023. My name is Bob Bowman. I'm the seminar coordinator until they find somebody who can do a better job and replace me. But nevertheless, tonight we're very pleased to have a Mound guy talk about things related to Mound. We always don't have that. We have other technology. But today, Doug Draper is here. He worked in health physics for about 20 years, starting in 81, with a little vacation in Fernald, but 2005. And Doug tells me he's still working full time. You know, for an old guy, that's very good. I'm trying to work full time too, but I can't get by a baby long enough. So anyhow, welcome. I'm sure he's going to talk about some very cool radioactivity stuff, right?
It will be.
It will be. All right, without further ado, here's Doug.
Thanks, Bob. Well, so my name's Doug Draper. I was in health physics when Herb Meyer was the health physics manager, and eventually I worked my way up to be health physics manager, and then promptly left and went to Fernald for a few years. Came back as RadCon manager and stayed till 2005. It's kind of interesting. When I came back to Mound, BWXT had left and CH2M Hill had come in, and the RadCon manager here at the time, he wound up leaving, and they were kind of desperate to get somebody in. I had a pretty nice gig down there for Fernald, and because BWXT had left, I had been taken out of Combo 80. So when they called and asked if I would come back, I said, well, I came up and interviewed. That went pretty well. They says, how much money do you want? I said, money isn't the issue. You can pay me what I'm making now. I don't need a pay raise. They said, oh, great, we're ready to hire you. I said, but I want back in Combo 80. They says, yeah, we probably can't get you back in Combo 80. I says, good, then I'll just stay where I am, but thanks for the interview. Well, let's look and see what we can come up with. So they came back that afternoon. I went back down to work. They came back that afternoon. They says, we think we can bring you on in Combo 80 if you start 2 weeks from today. I says, I could start 2 weeks from today. I says, but there's a catch. They says, okay, what's the catch? I says, you have to guarantee me that you will not let me go before I hit my Combo 80 date. They says, oh, we can't do that because we'll be out of here before you hit your Combo 80 date. I says, well, in that case, I'll just stay where I am because I've got Combo 75 here. He says, well, would you be, we think that the health physics end of this job will be gone by the time you start. Would you be willing to be the health and safety manager instead? I said, hey, I can be a dishwasher if you want me to be. I just want to get my Combo 80. So that was how I got hired back on by CH2M Hill.
As a dishwasher.
As a dishwasher. And RadCon manager, I had to wear 2 hats. So I came up on a Monday. My first task was, here is the schedule, the closer schedule, the closeout schedule. Here are the people that are working for you. Give me a layoff date for every person in your organization, including you. I says, that's easy. My layoff date is the day after I hit Combo 80. Now, where do we start with all the others? So, and I gotta say, CH2M Hill was very good about that. So, yeah, I have a little bit of history at Mound. I enjoyed every minute. Had a lot of fun, but boy, I'll tell you what, a lot of negotiation back and forth. When you're in health physics, you're telling people they can't do when they're wanting to do, you know, so there's always that kind of interaction. But today we're going to talk about the Radiological Assistance Team Callout for the Cambridge sources. Let me tell you a little bit about how this presentation came about. A year or so ago, maybe 2 years ago, I was at one of the meetings here, and one of my old buddies says, Doug, why don't you give another talk on one of the call-outs? I know you were out on a bunch of call-outs. and people are interested in hearing about the rat call-outs. And I says, well, there was a call-out that I haven't talked to anybody about. That was a Cambridge call-out. I can do a talk on that. And they says, yeah, that would be good. So that was the whole business of how we started that. So then when Bob set out the dues and all, I put on the bottom I'd be willing to give a talk, and that was how, how things kind of come together. That was how this came together. So anyway, it was kind of an informal put together. So I thought, well, let me see if I can find some stuff on the Cambridge sources, which I could not. Not a problem, because I was there. I knew what went on, right? So it all came up here. I can do this. Did you all see a flyer that said that the Cambridge sources was from a 1992 call out?
Yes, it's on the website.
Yeah, that was my memory in action. I just wanted to point that out. Okay, so I was supposed to give this talk on January 25th. It got snowed out, and then the snow didn't happen, but I had this presentation. So the Cincinnati Radiation Society says, hey, we need a talker. Do you have something you can put together? I said, yeah, I can give you a talk. I got one already in the bag. It's on the Cambridge sources. Of course, that didn't mean anything to anybody there. But he says, okay, yeah, give us a talk. Well, so I gave that talk to Cincinnati Radiation Society. As it turns out, they wrote up in the health physics newsletter, oh yeah, Doug Draper gave this talk on Cambridge sources, and it went very well, blah, 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 blah. I got a couple of calls from people that said, we do something about those Cambridge sources. Can we talk? And so, as it turns out, after I gave the talk to Cincinnati Radiation Society, I actually found out something about the Cambridge sources. So, you know how that is. So it's been this talk has been updated a couple of times. Let's first of all talk about where Cambridge is, in case you don't know. So this is us at Mound, and that is Cambridge, and there's Columbus in between, and there's Cincinnati. So that gives you an idea how far away Cambridge is. So it was a nice little trip over there. We got it all done in one day. Let me talk a little bit about my references. So I told you I was up here, right? I said, I know that this call out was April '92, as I recollect. But I couldn't find anything on it. So I went back to my calendar book. Now, I don't know how you all are with records at home. I am trying to get rid of my records, a lot of the stuff, but what I do is I pick it up. Oh, I gotta keep that. I gotta keep that. Yeah, I better keep that. So, calendar books, and back when I was a youth, I did a pretty good job keeping notes in my calendar book. So I went downstairs, file cabinet, pulled out 1992 and looked at April, no call out. So I said, that must have been May. I looked at May, nope. March, nope. I went through 1992, no call out. I would have recorded that. I mean, that was a significant event. I opened up the book, 1993, January 25th, the rat call out, Cambridge sources. So that's why it says 1992 on the flyer, and here it says 1993, as we'll see. So calendar book helped me a whole lot. And then I had some notebooks that I would keep notes when I talked to folks. So I've got some personal notes, but not much. An internet search didn't do much as far as Cambridge sources, but it gave me a lot of the DOE and the NRC history that plays into this talk. And then my personal recollections will also play into the talk a little bit. Okay, so here's how it all happened. January 25th, 1993, I'm the health physics manager. Tim Frazier calls me over to his office. I did not have notes about what Tim Frazier talked to me about, but I'm sure it was this Cambridge source thing. Early that afternoon, right after lunch, I had a meeting with Mike Austin. There I did have notes, and he says, prepare to activate the Radiological Assistance Team. Okay, we can do that. I said, so when is the RAT going to be activated effective? He says, tomorrow. Now okay, the RAT is response ready at any time, but when it's a planned event, you gotta do a little more up front. So the next day on the 26th, we went to Cambridge and we had a 14-hour response. On the 27th, I had a meeting with Mike Esper to talk about packaging and disposal of the sources that we recovered. I wrote up anybody here at Mound, you ever remember doing what were called daily reports? I did a daily report on this the next day. And wrote up the initial report on 2/2, which I did not have a copy of, by the way. And then I also coordinated photos on the 27th. On the 28th, we turned in the RAT gear, and I had a meeting with Mike Austin on characterization. So those are the documented activities from my calendar book and my meeting notes. Now it's time for my disclaimer. Now, has anybody ever been to a technical talk like we're having here? Doesn't every speaker say, okay, what I'm saying here is my own opinion, it doesn't reflect what my boss or my company or the government, everybody disclaims everything, right? I'm not going to give you that kind of disclaimer. Here is my disclaimer. From this moment on, anything you see or hear, you should not believe, because it is based on my memory. And I can tell you, if I can't even remember what year the call out was, the rest of this might be very suspicious. Now, some of the stuff I pulled off internet, okay, I pulled it off internet. That's another issue in its own right, even though they were government websites. But anyway, in any event, take this with a grain of salt. I hope it's entertaining. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what you have to do when there's a radiological assistance team call out, and you know that there's an event and that you got some background on it. Well, the first thing you have to do is notify management, because DOE activates the RAT, and they come directly to me, who is the captain of the RAT, Captain RAT, and there's nobody in management in between that's informed of what's going on. So I have to tell my boss, who tells his boss, who eventually gets up to the plant manager, who then may need to have other people in different organizations supporting us in different ways. So management needs to be informed. Then you got to identify where this thing is. Well, you saw the map where Cambridge was. I had to find that on a map because I'd never been to Cambridge, at least not that I knew of. It's not exactly on the interstate. It's off of the interstate. So, and then you got to figure out what the scope of the job is. Line up the people that you're going to need to do the job. Identify the equipment. If it's a strontium, if you're going to get strontium-90 sources, beta emitters, you don't want to take alpha instruments. That ain't going to do you a lot of good. So you got to have the right kind of equipment. If there's going to be contamination or potential contamination, you got to have protective equipment and clothing, dosimetry, appropriate dosimetry. It's very different to have a neutron source and neutron dosimetry than if you have a gamma source and gamma dosimetry. So you got to have proper dosimetry. Travel money. This is kind of interesting. See, back in the early 90s, there were such things as credit cards. I can tell you because my wife seemed to think that if you put it on the credit card, you didn't have to pay for it. That's a different story. That's another talk sometime in the future. But Mound also had credit cards, but they were not available to us. They were for them to use. So the question is, if you're going somewhere, you're going to need money, how do you do that? Well, security had 2 RAT envelopes. each had $500. And I could go over, sign for them. They pat me on the head, kick me in the butt, and send me out the door. That was how that was all the formality in drawing those two $500 envelopes. But you had to get your travel money. Then coordinate with security if where we were going was going to need any security. Support personnel, truck drivers, and whatever. And if it was going to look like it was going to be overnight, we had to make our own hotel reservations and things of that nature. They wanted us to stay within per diem, but they were kind of flexible on that. Okay, the initial meeting. Here's what Mike and I talked about at that first meeting. The Radiological Assistance Team was going to survey abandoned well logging sources in Cambridge, Ohio, and return the sources to Mound. So I thought to myself, all right, these are well logging sources. Well logging sources are captured under an NRC license. DOE doesn't have a license, it doesn't need one. And we, as EG&G at that time, we do not have a license and don't want to get one. So, these sources are NRC licensed sources. Can DOE even accept licensed sources from an NRC facility? Or these sources have to be licensed. So, then my question is, why are we getting the sources? Because if we don't have a license, we shouldn't be getting licensed sources. And what are we going to do with them when we get them? Okay, so this is what I find out. USNRC and DOE are going to sign a Memorandum of Understanding today. And that MOU will say that DOE will accept sources that NRC identifies that present a risk to the public. But there weren't any details. All they were going to do is sign an MOU. So to me it was like, well, okay, I guess that means we can go get the sources. Excuse me. So, the source of the sources. Okay, so there was a well logger in Cambridge, Ohio, and he had he had a small well logging business. He becomes ill and passes away.
What is a well logger?
Okay, so let's say that you are going to drill a well to look for oil shale. Okay, so you drill this hole, but you don't know what's down the hole. So you put a radioactive source down there, and if it's a neutron source, if it is an organic layer, it absorbs the neutrons, and the reflection back is decreased. So if it's sandstone, you get a big reflection back. Oil, not much reflection. So you can use that to tell what the different geological characteristics are as far as oil and things like that. Then they have gamma sources, and a gamma detector you can put down there, look at the naturally occurring radioactivity to see if there's thorium, uranium, or things of that nature. So well loggers put sources down holes that they've drilled.
And they record the depth.
And they, yes,
They
and
watch
at
the
the
depths,
depth they
they
tell
actually
them.
log the well as you go down.
Right,
That's oil and gas country out there,
yes.
eastern Ohio.
So, after he dies, his wife assumes the business, and bottom line is the business doesn't stay in business very long. The bank says, we're going to confiscate and take everything you have to pay off the loans, which they do. They went to his office in downtown Cambridge, took the trucks, trailers, everything. Somebody at the bank, I never did get any details on this, somebody at the bank happened to notice those things have radiation stickers on them. We don't want those. So they said to to the lady, we have some things that are probably more personal, so we don't want those. She says, okay, well, where are they? They says, we're giving them back to you in your trailer. She says, okay, we'll just park it around back. So they parked the trailer around back. Now, years later, this lady has now found somebody to have a future with. And the question is, do we sell your house or my house? They decide to sell her house. So they're getting everything packed up. The new beau goes out back. He says, what's in this trailer? She says, I don't know, some stuff back from when my hubby was in business. He opens the door and says, we don't want this. So he doesn't know what to do with it. He calls the police. Police say, well, that doesn't look like anything we can handle. They call the state. The state says, oh yeah, we better call NRC. NRC, knowing that this MOU is going to be signed, calls DOE. So and that's how we wind up getting involved. So, the call out consisted of Mike Austin, who was DOE, Ray Brashear, Roy Mallon, and me from Health Physics, and Mike Ishmael and Jerry Crawford. Now, I was certain that Jerry Rudy went with us on this. I could have sworn Jerry Rudy went with us. And as it turns out, Jerry Rudy did not go with us. Roy Mallon did. I remember Ray being there. I remember Mike and Jerry Crawford being there, and Mike and I had a number of discussions. But I thought Jerry Rudy was there, so that just goes to show you how little my memory really remembers. Now, how do I know these folks were there? Because I found in my AOS emails where I had emailed the folks in dosimetry when we got back. I says, pull these dosimeters and do a special processing on them so we know if there were any potential doses from handling these sources, and issue us new dosimeters, which they did. So I hit that email, so that's how I know who was actually on the trip. Now, we took some monitoring instruments and the swipe counter and PPE and money and response cases. We went in 2 vehicles, a van and a Mound truck. Now, when we got to the site, we met a guy from NRC, Mike Galinsky, and shortly thereafter, an Ohio Rand Health Department person came along, Carl Heller, and there were some parking issues, which I'll show you in just a moment. We met the owner and her future husband and had a brief walk around the site to the location of the sources. And I remember that it was a pleasant, cool day. I had on a light jacket. I remember at some point in time it got kind of chilly. We had to put our gloves on. But it was basically a pretty nice day, pretty warm. Okay, so here is, you know, Google Earth is remarkable, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
I could still find that house just by knowing what the driveway and all was like. So well, here it is. So this is the house. Okay, now we had NRC there and Ohio, and there was some other folks, I don't even know who all was there. And the lady and her husband, or the lady and her future husband, and this was their parking area, and they wanted to have access to bring their one vehicle back and forth. And the other folks already were parked up on this side. They didn't want anybody driving around in the grass because it was kind of mucky and they were trying to sell the house, right? So they didn't want something that in the land, and we got a truck and a van, and this road goes to other houses back here, so we couldn't really park along here. But we didn't want to park down here because this is a major highway and we were afraid we'd get whacked in the back end. So it was kind of a problem finding a place to park. And what we wound up doing was we parked the van here, and as I recollect, we parked the car like right there, and were able to get back and forth that way. So here's what's interesting. There is the trailer, approximately, and there is where the kids were playing. So looked to me like it did present some sort of imminent hazard to the public. Had been that way for years, and interestingly, though, nobody had realized it in the past. Okay.
I have a question.
Yeah.
When did the husband die, the first husband die?
You know, I never did hear.
I would have thought so.
I think I expect he died of a heart attack, but I don't know. Yeah, heck, I can't even remember who was on the response team. I get it. Okay, so at the site, the small there was a small closed trailer. It was roped off and locked. Now I'm thinking to myself, okay, we're just responding to this for the first time. How is there rope around the trailer? Obviously, somebody had known that that MOU was going to be signed. And so they didn't want to take it on themselves to address anything till we got there. Then we could do the addressing. How long that rope had been up, I have no idea. But there was a rope up and there was a lock on the trailer. Okay. When we opened the trailer, there were 3 or 4 bags of trash in there, some calibration and tracer source ampules. Okay, I've got here 3 AMB neutron sources and pigs, 2 to 3 curies each. As it turns out, there were 4 sources. And then there were 3 or 4 cesium sources. As it turns out, there were 4. And maybe a small cobalt-60 source in a pig. As it turns out, there was no cobalt-60 source. I'm giving you the inner workings of my sometimes pretty close memory, but not always. Okay, now this is what the trailer looked like. This is a sketch from U-Haul, but that was almost exactly what the trailer was like. The trash and all was on this side, the AMD sources were on this side, and the cesium sources were on the back side. And we opened that trailer up, and we had a plastic mat here, some herculite, and we would bring the things out, put them down on there. We had a table set up off to the side. We'd take swipes, take them over, count the swipes, and then make a disposition. Okay, here's what the sources look like. Okay, so the calibration sources and the ampule are usually in ampules like this, and so there were probably 2 dozen of these calibration sources. There were 4 cesium sources. Excuse me, this is what a cesium source normally comes and looks like. That's usually your old millicurie to maybe small curie sources. And when they get larger, they put them in capsules like that. This is a typical neutron source. You got a swage lock down here, and this is triple encapsulated welded steel tops and frits. And this neutron source, this AMD source, puts off 60 keV gamma and neutrons. Here is what sources are typically stored in. So these would be some example neutron source pigs. That's an example of a gamma pig as a rule. That would be a gamma pig probably. So I think that would probably be a good sized gamma pig. These things weigh about 75 pounds, maybe 100. These usually weigh about 35, 40 pounds. Sometimes they can be 150 pounds, something like that.
Are they made of iron or do they have lead in them?
Okay, so they're iron on the outside, lead up close, unless it's a neutron source, and then they have wet on the inside, which is water extended plastic, because the water absorbs the neutrons and the plastic. And so, and then they have the steel on the outside, which is usually like, 1 millimeter thick.
So it's very, very thin metal steel, but it's heavy because you got a fairly thick
Right.
shooting of lead in there.
And so, if it's like a gamma source, you only need like maybe 3 or 4 inches of lead, so you only need about that big around. And then the steel on the outside supports the lead.
Excuse me.
Okay.
Was there any survey of radiation level outside of the trailer?
Yes, we did that before we opened the trailer. So we did background, we didn't see any background. Then we opened the trailer and we saw the trash, and that was, we took some readings on as we opened the door. And we brought the bags of trash out first. Those got double bagged and tied off, put aside. Then we started bringing out the calibration sources, those ampules. But they were very small quantities, so we didn't expect to see much on them. In fact, we used to get those calibration sources here at Mound for our environmental studies. And then we started getting into the larger sources and all like that. So
How
we
long
would,
has this trailer been sitting there?
years.
So how does this stuff degrade? Is it not
Okay,
degraded?
so, yeah, it degrades. Now, most of those calibration sources and ampules, okay, they had some iodine 131, 8.05 days, gone goose. They had a couple of iridium sources, 74 days, nothing there. They had some americium beryllium, 433-year half-life, that was there. And then the cesium 137s, 30-year half-life, yeah, they were there too. So some of them were decayed away and some were real.
So I got the impression there was no issue with the general public at all, since you didn't see any radiation around it?
Not till we got up next to the sources.
Well,
Yeah,
yeah.
but, yeah.
Was the
out-
trailer locked?
It was when we got there, but I'm thinking the condition of the lock probably would indicate that it was put up with the rope.
And knowing kids, they'd find a way in, wouldn't they?
You know what, I think nobody, who knows what had happened at that trailer before we got there.
All the good stuff was gone.
Yeah, there might have been actually 12 sources there. We only found 8. Here's the interesting thing. After we checked everything out and everything seemed to be okay, no source certificates, only license notes. That'll become important as we talk about the next slide. Okay, the sources were in pigs, not shipping containers. Now, for those of you who are well-versed with shipping radioactive materials, I'm sure you know about these kinds of containers. There's a type A and a type B shipping container for radioactive materials. Type A containers are designed to withstand accidents normal to transportation. So you have a type A container on the back of the truck, it falls off on the ground. It's not going to cause a release that would cause a problem to the public. Then there are type B quantities. Type B quantities depend on the radionuclide, the physical and chemical form, the quantity, excuse me, things like that. Those have to go in a type B container, and a type B container is designed for a specified accident scenario. So, you've seen the picture of the railroad engine that's shooting down, rocket propelled into the side of a truck, and you see this big, okay, that's a type B container. Okay, so when it comes to AMB, there are two types of AMB sources. One is special form, the other is normal form. Normal form can go in a type A container up to 0.027 curies. If it's above that, it's got to go in a type B container. Special form can go in a type A container up to 270 curies, and above 270 curies it goes in type B. These sources were 2 to 3 curies each. If they're special form, they can go in a type A container, no problem. If they're normal form, they have to go in a type B container, big problem. So where do you know whether your sources are normal form or special form? You remember those certificates that we didn't have? You gotta have certificates that say that. And later I found out we had 4 cesium sources. Okay, here's a couple of examples of type B containers. Those are small ones, but that gives you an idea of what kind of containers they have. Now, let me say this about these sources. First of all, we did not have shipping containers, type A or type B. And the sources were not in shipping containers. They were in storage containers. If you knowingly put a normal form source that exceeds a type A package in a type A package and knowingly ship it, that could be a $25,000 fine, even back then. So we had 4 of these sources, a potential of a $100,000 fine if we mischaracterize and ship them inappropriately. Now, we had bought our house not too awfully long before that. I've already given you an indication of my wife's demeanor. I can tell you she would have been most unamused if I had come home with a $100,000 fine, because DOT can levy fines against individuals. So, I was hesitant to ship these sources. However, Mike Austin, being the good guy that he was, and a federal employee, said, I'll sign for those sources, which I thought was wonderful. He relieved us of the possession of the sources, but he did not relieve us of the DOT specifications for shipping the sources, because that was a Mound contractor that was driving the truck with the sources. We came to an agreement. NRC says, we will exempt you from that. I says, great, but this isn't NRC's to exempt us from. This is DOT. So, you can't exempt us, but here's what we can do. If you will provide us with an escort, that'll probably be okay. So they called the Ohio Highway Patrol, and they escorted us. Well, they escorted us most of the way. Okay, we strapped these source pigs to the vehicle tie-downs, placard transportation. We did as much as we could to make this a real shipment. Got back to Mound about 9 o'clock. Well, now you think about this, we had left at 6 in the morning, and we had to stop along the way home and get something to eat for supper. We stopped at a restaurant. I don't remember what the name of the restaurant was, but it was supposed to be the oldest restaurant in Ohio, and it was somewhere between Cambridge and Mound. I always thought it was the Golden Lamb, but no, the Golden Lamb as it turns out, is the oldest hotel that serves food, but this was, restaurant was supposed
We
to be.
on
old.
16 in Coshocton. Coshocton's a really old town, and there's like a canal town there, and it really goes back.
You know what? That's as good a guess as any.
Because you could go on 16 from Cambridge back to 70 now.
That's probably how we did it, because I remember it was an old house and good food, and we were essentially the only people there, and when they saw us come in, everybody left.
I got a question real quick. Was there any issue with, in 1992 was when the CDL came on, the commercial driver's license, where you have to have the endorsements for hazmat?
And that's why we took Mike.
Did the guy that drove have a newer CDL with a hazmat endorsement?
I think Mike did.
Okay.
And that was why he was chosen, because there were only a couple of people
Yep.
around at the time that had CDL, that had gone through the training. We had a number of people in the training. Okay, so when we got here, we put the sources in T238, and that is going to be another topic that we need to discuss a little bit of. And the next day, we coordinated the photos to get the sources and all like that, pictures of them, issued the daily report, met with Mike Hisper on packaging and transport, and the sources were relocated to PP-140 a few days later. Well, now here were the questions we had to talk about. Okay, so we had these bags of waste. What do we do with the waste? Because these were not mound-generated waste, can we ship that as waste? Because, I mean, the places we would ship waste, we didn't have a profile for what was in these bags. What can we do with the sources? Could they be transferred? If so, who owns the sources to be able to transfer them? I'm guessing Mike, because he signed for the sources. I know one thing, it wasn't me. Could the sources be transported? If we found somebody that said, hey, we'd love to have those sources, good, we'll transfer them to you. Could we transfer them? Without source certificates, they'd have to go in a Type B container. And I can tell you, Mound was not going to pay for Type B containers for these cesium sources. Can the sources be disposed? If so, who would take these sources, and how do we generate profiles for them? Or, according to Mike, could we use any of the sources? As it turns out, we could, and so we actually did use a couple of the sources all the way up till we wound up closing the site. Okay, so who has jurisdiction over orphan sources? As it turns out, numerous entities have jurisdiction. Each of the states has jurisdiction, as well as those, at least those federal agencies. So it becomes very confusing when you see who actually, if you try to put your finger back on who actually is responsible for it. That's part of the reason that NRC and DOE had that MOU. All right, so okay, I never did see the 1992 MOU. And I say it's a 1992 MOU, but it must have been 1993 MOU because it was signed the day before we went to pick up these sources. But there was a 1999 MOU on the internet at a government site, so I'm assuming that it's pristine and perfect. And there they talked about some formally defined activities carried out since 1992 under the agreements. They addressed the problem of unwanted or uncontrolled radioactive sources, and the need for the agreement existed because in 1991 or 2, it may have been early 92, it may have been 91, is when the commercial waste disposal sites were no longer allowed to take anything greater than a Class C waste as low-level waste. And I think that was put in, I think that requirement was put in place by EPA in 1989, but it took them a few years to get to the point that they weren't allowed to take the sources anymore. Okay. So, what the MOU provided was that DOE would take licensed material, special nuclear material, or byproduct, and that was because of the Class C limits, greater than Class C limits, and DOE would consider to take additional material that did not exceed Class C limits if appropriate. All right, so let's talk about the origin of the off-site source recovery project. Okay, so this is from a report from 2019, fairly recent, and it talks a little bit about the history. Pre-1994, which I assume is us, need for end-of-life source management was identified, and the radioactive source recovery program was conceived in 1994. Now, we had gone to pick up these sources in January of '93. There was no program in place with what to do with these. And NRC and DOE had not coordinated that. So when we tried to send the sources off to dispose of them, we were not allowed to dispose of them because they weren't our sources, and they were not used for DOE purposes, which is if we had sent it out to MTS, it would have had to been a DOE type waste. Okay, 1997, the radioactive source recovery project was demonstrated to be effective, so they decided to make it a real project. Then, DOE introduced the off-site source recovery project in 1998. So from 93 to 98, 98 is when we come up with the off-site source recovery project. And OSRP has been recovering disused sealed sources now for over 2 decades, according to their document, which they were very proud of at Los Alamos. Okay, so 1999 MOU, getting back to that. Most cases covered under the MOU would involve only a small number of sealed sources or devices, and only a relatively small licensees. The subsequent DOE recovery and disposition would be generally limited to packaging and transport. And NRC would arrange for transfer of title and recovered materials to DOE. This is 1999. So NRC says they'll arrange for the transfer of title. But they did not. Okay, here's the 2011 Memorandum of Understanding between NRC and DOE to go back and modify the 1999 MOU. It was modified to formally include the off-site source recovery program. The DOE radioactive source recovery program was conceived in '94. The OSRP was conceived in 1998, and it was the only mechanism to dispose of true sources of WIP, and post 9/11 international recovery missions were discussed at a 1998 NRC workshop. Okay, I'm going to talk for just a second about this OSRP. Remember, they were saying that there would only be a very few sources, and they'd be small licenses, blah, blah, blah. Well, in that Los Alamos paper, they were talking about, they were very proud of the fact they've already recovered more than 40,000 sources.
Better keep track of it.
Were those just from the U.S. or from them international? Because after the Soviet
Well,
Union collapsed,
yes,
a lot of that came
now
out of the
they,
Soviet
well, the OSRP was extended after 9/11 to be able to take sources from overseas
Okay.
as well. And so there are like 70 countries that the U.S. has recovered sources from, as well as our Cambridge sources. So, the small amount of waste that we got at the Cambridge source was, we did, whether it went, listen, I don't know where it went. It may have gone to NTS, it may have gone, who knows, probably NTS. The calibration source ampules were disposed probably with Mounds. We had a lot of them as well. The cesium sources, we used 2 of those sources in Ron Daly's calibration lab because they were a nice size and worked very nicely. And then the AMD sources were transferred to the OSRP sometime between 2002 and 2005. I'm not exactly sure when they actually wound up going. But this is one of the guys that answered my talk. This is, okay, it says Joseph Tompkins here, right? It may be Andy Tompkins. I'm not sure whether it's Andy or Joseph. His email says Joseph, but I think he's Andy. In any event, Andy was at the health physics meeting this year. I was at the health physics meeting, and we got to chit chat a little bit and talk crossways about some of these sources. He was sent here from Los Alamos to recover the AMD sources. And this is him in, listen, I don't know where that was. Anybody recognize those file cabinet drawers? What building that would have been?
Our building,
It could have been R, and it may have been building 45. I'm not sure. I don't remember building 45 having multicolored drawers. That's why I'm saying probably R. That's one picture of him, and that is one of the neutron sources. And here's another picture. There's one of the neutron sources. They're taking readings on it. 90 MR per hour gamma and 345 MR per hour neutron. And there they got some smear data. So they're getting ready to package that in one of their Type B. Okay, so Los Alamos, as part of this OSRP, recognized they were going to have problems like we have here, most places they went. So they designed a Type B container that was small, that they could take wherever they needed to go. They take the source, put it in there, put another seal that up, put it inside a secondary, seal that up. That goes into a tertiary, which then goes into the final packaging, which is their Type B container. They got that licensed and approved, and so that's how they're able to go out and get these AMD sources now. Okay, so here are some other things that we had to consider. Of course, we got our plant closure notice in '93 also. And the 3 organizations that were involved in the plant closure were DOE, EPA, and Ohio EPA. At the same time, in '92, is when DOE came up with the DOE RadCon manual implementation. So we were trying to implement the changes in the RAD program. At the same time, we were having to deal with these sources. And DOE came up with the RMMA. Now, does anybody remember what the RMMA was? Radioactive Material Management Area. This is something that caused me great consternation. Here's what DOE effectively said. Those of you that are getting rid of things, you can get rid of anything that has no rad added. Here's the problem with that. Everything has radioactivity in it. How can you tell whether you added radioactivity to it or not? See, always before we had limits. If it was below this amount, out the door. DOE says, we're changing that. And that was after the metals fiasco down in Oak Ridge, where they took the metal and they would melt it and then use it for reuse contaminated metal for shipping containers and things of that nature. Well, anyway, so DOE decided that we aren't going to send out anything that's got any radioactivity on it. mathematically, you cannot prove 0. You can only prove that it's less than some amount above 0, depending on what your ability is to measure. So, if you haven't been in a building where there's ever been any radioactive material brought in, it can leak. So, I hesitate to say that we could take anything out of this building because we did have some Fiestaware back then. But Fiestaware is exempt, so I guess we're okay, right? But if there was radioactive material in this building, you'd have to be able to prove that it did not leak. And then if it didn't leak, then we could get rid of all this furniture and all. But if it did, it has to go out as radioactive waste. Here's the problem. Neutrons, when they interact with matter, can cause those atoms that they interact with to become radioactive. If you had the sources in a room that had never been contaminated, but if they were, just by the very fact that the sources were in the room, you might have caused some individual atoms to become radioactive. And now you cannot say definitively that there was no rad added. Listen, I had a number of not always totally professional discussions with guys. What are you trying to achieve? You know? And then what they wanted to achieve was, we don't want DOE to go getting whacked over the head because we've sent radioactive material off-site, like down to the melters, the smelters down in Oak Ridge. Well, that means that wherever these Cambridge neutron sources were moved to, became an RMMA. And that means anything in those places would have had to have been classified as potentially rad added. Now, as I was putting this paper together, I thought to myself, oh crap, what did we do about the trucks? Worse, what did we do about the people who picked up the sources and the tongs and all, and the, you know, it just starts mushrooming and mushrooming. Well, in any event, you know, I told you I wound up leaving Mound for 5 years and going to Fernald. When I came back, the sources were gone. Well, they were either gone then, or the 8 or 9 months that I spent up in New York while I was working for CH2ML. In any event, I did not have to deal with that. I'm happy as a clam. Somebody else took care of that, but I just want you to know that that is, the RMMA did pose issues. In conclusion, Mound responded to a request to capture uncontrolled radioactive sources. Number of Mound functions participated. We had nuclear operations, we had environmental, we had waste management, we had health and safety, health physics, and engineering, all working at one time or another on, also public relations with the photos and all like that. So there were a number of different organizations at Mound that came across this either intentionally or unintentionally. Number of lessons learned were found, but I don't know that any of them were captured. Now let's talk about why is, okay, this is old history, right? So it was a nice little trip down memory lane. Okay, let's talk about some recent. Okay, 1997 isn't all that recent, but I would like to just chat a little bit about this one because it's kind of interesting. Okay, so back in the 80s, Ronald Reagan made the comment, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. Within a matter of months, the USSR explodes and dissolves. And now we've got all these states out there. Now, these individual states, each are now responsible for their own security. They have to have an army, et cetera, et cetera. So there was a USSR training base in Georgia. Georgia over there, not Georgia down here. There's no Atlanta in the Georgia I'm talking about. Okay, so they says, we've got this training base, we'll train our military there. They move in, they start training. Turns out they wind up with a dozen people who are suffering radiation sickness. It's like, that's kind of strange, there's no sources here anywhere. How could they be having radioactive, how could they be having radiation sickness? So they went out and started looking. Turns out that a portion of that base had been a highly classified training area for the Russian troops to learn how to fight and do combat in a nuclear environment. And when the USSR picked up and moved out, they didn't remove the sources. So, they've recaptured 200 or 300 sources, and they don't know that they have them all, but in any event, that was what the Georgia unlabeled sources incident was. Okay, in January 2000, I don't know what salmon kraken is, but I think that's in Indonesia. There was a Cobalt-60 unit that was turned into a metal recycler. Now, nobody knew that there was a Cobalt-60 source inside this big hunk of metal. And so the source wound up being dislodged from its shield. The shield wound up getting recycled. And 2 people died, and up to 2,000 people were potentially seriously exposed to the radiation from this source before they found it and were able to capture it. The Petco Pet Food Bowls fiasco of August 2012. Anybody remember that? Yeah, that was, let's see, Bed Bath & Beyond and others. They got these pet bowls in, stainless steel. Turns out the stainless steel had, as they were making the stainless steel, they were also dissolving up some Cobalt-60 sources. And so they discovered that after they had already hit the market. And so they had a large recall of pet food bowls. Unfortunately, I found out about that before I could go down there to buy one to put in my demo kit. Probably just as well. Okay, December 13, Mexico City, cesium-137. Anybody familiar with this one? Okay, so what happened was this medical facility has a cesium irradiator they want to get rid of. They hire this company to come pick up the source, transport it to wherever it was being transferred. It's either going to be disposed of or reused. So it was kind of a long trip. The guy stops to get something to eat. When he gets out of his truck, a couple of banditos come up, put a gun up to him and says, "Give us your keys," which of course he did. And they take off down the road, unaware of what's on the back of their truck. Turns out they didn't care what was on the back of the truck, they just wanted the truck. Later, it was the disused source was found a couple of kilometers from a small town, and the shipping container had been breached. Okay. I never was able to find out definitively But there was a rumor that there were 4 people that, turned themselves into the hospital for examination, and what happened from that point on, I don't know. But in any event, the source was recovered. Tromsø, March 15. Okay, Tromsø was a facility in Norway where they did training. And they did all kinds of training, health and safety training, et cetera, et cetera. Part of what they did was they trained on use of radioactive materials and things of that nature. Well, somebody comes in and they says, we want to use your training facility for a week, and we want to use your whole facility. So he says, well, we don't want them to get their hands on our radioactive materials, right? So they package them all and take them out. They do the training. Okay, now they decide to bring everything back in. Everything comes back in except the sources. I don't know whatever happened to those sources. I don't think anybody's aware of the americium, cesium, and strontium-90 sources that were in Tromsø, but they aren't back in the building to my knowledge. Harborview. Harborview is kind of, I guess if you were somebody that liked dark humor, this would be Harborview. Harborview was a hospital that was getting rid of one of their cesium blood irradiators. Blood irradiators are used to irradiate blood to make it less of an issue for blood transfusions to people that have some. Listen, I don't remember what the blood radiation does, but it does something that makes it good, better to use.
Kills all the bugs.
Kills some bugs, that's for sure. Probably does. In fact, now that you mention it. Well, so they're going to replace this cesium irradiator with an X-ray irradiator, so they don't have an issue with handling radioactive material. The source does not fit in the shipping container. You remember we were talking about OSRP? They go out and pick up these sources. Well, they were picking this one up. They said, source does not fit in our type B container. We'll just saw off the end of it. Folks, if this was me and I was sawing a source, you know what? I think I'd at least have it in a glove box of some sort, right? That's me. They did it down on the loading dock
Oh my God.
in kind of like a fume hood kind of operation. But they didn't want the fan on, so they didn't have the fan on in the fume hood. There's 2 ends of the stick. One of them has a source, the other is kind of inert. So they're cutting up at this end where it's inert, right? Wrong.
Oh,
That
Jesus.
would be where the source is. Now, because it was on the loading dock, that was where the intake was for the building. This was the medical research building for the campus. I think it was Washington State.
Jesus.
They had to evacuate the building. They had to go in, and they had contamination up and down the elevator shafts, behind the walls, in the ventilation ducts. It was a fairly new building, so they've had to go in and do all this stripping, and bottom line is, it's not done yet. Oh, I think it got finished this last summer, $60 million.
Oh my God.
And that was the guys that know what they're doing. I'm almost afraid to think what people that don't know what they're doing. Okay, January 23 in Australia, they lose the cesium-137 source. Now, I never did hear what the size of the source was, curie-wise, but I know size-wise it was a very small source. The government says, if you find this source, stay at least 5 meters away. Well, if you're staying 5 meters away, how would you even know? I mean, you wouldn't even be able to see the source. A complicated by the fact that they put out no photos of the source, so you wouldn't even know what you were looking at. Eventually, somebody driving down the road with a radiation instrument did find the source, and they were able to recover it. Thailand, March 2023. Let's see, what was the March 2023 within Thailand? I remember. So, February 2023, a source is lost. The government doesn't notify, and this is in a downtown area. The government does not notify the people until mid-March. So now people are saying, oh man, there's a radioactive source out here somewhere. I wonder where it might be. 2 weeks later, some cesium-137 dust turns up at a smelter on the outskirts of town. The government says, that's probably where it is, and that's the end of the story. I don't know that I would be going to Bangkok unless I was taking an instrument with me, or at least a dosimeter. October 23, Chicago, Indium-111. So, this is kind of an interesting one. A number of Indium-111 sources were misplaced, lost, or somehow or other they did not wind up in their storage location at a Chicago hospital. Later, I believe they were found. I think they did find them, but that for a while they were lost and unaccounted for. So things happen all the time. It's good that we have an OSRP. I think if I had them come pick up any cesium sources, I'd make sure that the sources that they were picking up would fit inside their containers before I turned them over to them. But there's a lot still going on. Now here's something I came across, a couple of months ago, which I thought was fascinating. Remember, we were the very first event to invoke the NRC DOE MOU in January of '93. So this DOE request was made on December 7th, 1992. We are requesting the assistance. Since controlled sources cannot be ensured, they must be removed from Dr. Fisher's position. Okay, 600 curies of cobalt-60. I never did hear what happened to that. So now I am in a quandary. Was Mound the first unit to invoke the MOU with NRC, or were we like maybe the second and we just don't know about it? I can't really say for sure. All I can say is there was a lot of complexity to the first handling of the MOU between NRC and DOE to control sources. And this I found out in one of my AOS emails later that was kind of pieced back together. This turned out to actually be the list of sources that we got from Cambridge. This was an AOS from Mike Austin. So, any questions?
Doug, you didn't mention, these are industrial sources that were bought by a company with the company's name probably imprinted on it, and you didn't address that. I'm curious why you didn't contact the company, because they have systems in place to handle those kind of...
Yeah, Monsanto, okay, so Monsanto had Mound up until '88. Monsanto Research Corporation. Monsanto Research Corporation also made sources at the Dayton lab. And so for years, up until well, in fact, in the late 90s, we were still getting calls, hey, we have a Monsanto Research Corporation source, what can we do with it? Of course, by that time, there was no Monsanto Research Corporation, so, but we did have a point of contact at Monsanto that we could send them to. For a while there, it was Clarence Styron.
So they were Monsanto-made
Yeah.
sources? Okay,
Yeah.
I didn't pick up on that.
Well, some of them were. I mean, some of the
So-
sources out there were
so-
Monsanto Research
So
Corporation.
then it was out,
But those
Monsanto-
sources were not.
then it was out of business by that time.
Right, and,
Yeah.
and I think that was what the case with whoever made these neutron sources.
Got it.
So, tremendous amount of effort and work and time over the years. Who paid for that? How was that funded? Out of operating, or did somebody had to pay your guys hours and all the other stuff? How did that work?
It wound up being by 40 hours. Actually, if you want to think about it, Bob, the way it actually worked out, I got paid for 40 hours a week.
Yeah.
There were some weeks that I probably worked less than 50 hours.
Yeah. I
Not
understand
many.
that.
So I would bet that extra 10 hours paid for things like this.
Oh, okay, but officially, we always had cost accounts.
We
supposed
should
to
have
do, and
had-
when they send somebody out to do something, presumably it's a charge number.
We should have a charge number and a cost center.
Yeah,
There was no cost center for the radiological assistance team.
okay.
Now, I had, okay, going back to Mound Accounting, I had a cost center with one person in it, cost center 781. That was me, and anything I charged. It may have wound up there, I don't know. I don't remember, I know there was no specific charge number or cost
So
center.
you got a call, or Monsanto, Mound Laboratory got a call, but it was no longer Monsanto when you got the call. And they were saying, go take care of this, and there's no authorization to go, no funding to support it. Just, this is what you're
All that
doing.
is true.
Okay. Hell of a way to run a business, all I can say.
And the reason why was
Public
because they couldn't
April 15th
predict how many
covers
call-outs we would have.
Can you say a little bit about when the notion of the radiological assistance team was conceived, why, and who was it that assembled their standard procedures and things? Tell us about the RAT.
Okay, so the RAT actually went back to the 50s, radiological assistance.
Was this a Mound conception?
No, it was an AEC. And there were radiological assistance teams at each of the AEC sites. But AEC was broken into regions, and actually they weren't regions at the time. They were
Operation office,
projects, operations offices. So the Chicago operations office had what was called a RAP, Radiological Assistance Program. And that was the Chicago operations. Argonne had a RAT. Battelle Columbus had a RAT. Ashtabula, well, whoever was in the Chicago operations had RATs under the Chicago operations Radiological Assistance Program. Our RAT was under the Albuquerque RAT for a while, and then we got, and then they decided to make it regionalized, and then we went under the Region 5. Was it Region 5 or Region 3? I don't remember, whatever the region was that Argonne had. And when we became a RAT, or when we went under Chicago RAP, Chicago also activated a RAT at Fernald. So those guys came up here to learn how we actually did RAT. They were up here for a number of days. We went down there to help them a number of days. And a couple of RATs went away. The Ashtabula RAT went away. One of the others, I don't remember. So the RAT program was actually part of the Radiological Assistance Program, which was designed
By the AEC.
with the AEC and went back and the exact when it actually happened, I don't know exactly, but I believe it was part of an understanding with the what was the program with the that later became FEMA, where they had the underground or all the buildings that had the signs on them for
Civil
fallout
defense.
shelters. Civil defense program. Yeah, so I think RAP was part of the civil defense program where we could support our own types of operations.
Thank you.
Is the RAT the response group that went to 3 Mile Island to
Yes.
respond there?
Okay, so now this is kind of an interesting discussion. 3 Mile Island was an NRC licensee. So everything that happened within the fence line at 3 Mile Island was the responsibility of the, let's see, it was, who was the owner of 3 Mile Island? Pennsylvania Gas and Electric or something like, whoever it was. So they had responsibility inside the fence line. Who had responsibility outside the fence line? EPA? DOE? No. State of Pennsylvania, who did not have enough resources to be able to support it. So they got with, they invoked the Radiological Assistance Program, and I think it was out of Brookhaven at that time, to send radiological assistance teams to help. But EPA also sent some teams to help from their Radiological Emergency Response Team.
I have one final question before we let you go home, but certainly.
You don't know that it's final yet. We may have more.
Well, but I think you're done.
All right.
Hey, I've got all evening.
Yeah.
The great honest has spoken. Never mind that man behind the
Yeah,
curtain.
they're paying attention to
You
you.
remember I told you that I work on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday?
Oh, you're still going, huh? Okay. When you talk about recovery of the isotope, recovery mean extracting it and reusing it, or does it mean permanent burial? What does recovery mean?
Recovery means repurposing if possible, reusing in the way it is designed, or disposing. So what we're actually doing is disposing or dispositioning a source, not necessarily disposing a
Okay,
source.
so it's dispositioning from somebody else, but do they actually recover isotopes and reuse them in another device, a chemical separation, or?
Sometimes they do. I don't think Los Alamos does that, although they have the capability to do it. However, where you would see that happen would be like in the case of a cobalt-60 source, they will recover cobalt-60 sources and combine them to either upgrade to a larger cobalt-60 source.
So you can do that with cobalt, it has a long half-life and very,
5 1/4 years, yeah.
so it's long enough.
The thing about cobalt-60 is it's easy to do because cobalt-60 is in the form of a foil.
Okay.
So you just pull the foil out, put it another way.
Yep, and the others are not.
Cesium-137 is usually in the form of a chloride.
Yeah.
And so that is kind of like table salt.
Yeah.
It's a little bit messy.
A little moisture or something, that would just spread, right? I mean, it's
Right.
hygroscopic, and as I
Yeah.
recall, my chemistry says it's a very hygroscopic salt.
So that source from Thailand that I was
Yeah.
talking about, that is one of the new sources. It was that was a cesium ceramic.
Okay, so it's kind of
So,
ceramic.
yeah, they've just started going to, there's been a push to try to go to
More
ceramics.
stabilized.
Right.
Okay, let's thank Doug, everybody. I'm sure if you want to stay here all night and chat with you.